Commander Vex had seen enough species rise and fall to know that every civilization told itself the same comfortable lie. They were the apex predators of their corner of space. The Kithera believed their crystalline exoskeletons made them invulnerable. The hegemony bred warriors in vats and called it evolution. The Syndicate purchased loyalty with credits and mistook commerce for conquest. Yet here they all sat in her war room, staring at data streams from a backwater planet called Earth, arguing about whether its inhabitants qualified as a legitimate threat or an elaborate joke. "Look at this recording," sneered Ambassador Thek, his multiple eye stalks weaving patterns of disgust. "They call it Thermopylae, 300 warriors against an entire empire, and they consider heroic that they all died. Death before Dasana mythology," added General Croft, her biomechanical implants clicking with dismissive calculations. Classic primitive posturing. Every species goes through this phase before they discover proper tactical doctrine. Vex remained silent, watching the holographic displays cycle through centuries of human conflict documentation. The Coalition had been monitoring Earth for decades, cataloging their wars with the clinical detachment of entomologists studying insects. The humans fought constantly, against each other, against their environment, against diseases, against concepts like tyranny and injustice that most species simply accepted as natural law. It was exhausting to observe. "Commander, surely you don't take this seriously," pressed Dr. Vig, the Kithera's chief xenobiologist. His translucent features rippled with what passed for amusement among his kind. Their combat records read like mental illness reports. They charged machine gun nests with bayonets. They rammed ships into larger ships. They dig tunnels under fortifications and blow themselves up along with their enemies. And they call it glory, Thek spat, madness masquerading as valor. The youngest member of their council, Sub-Ambassador Nix of the Hegemony, had remained unusually quiet throughout the briefing. Fresh from the academy, bred for diplomacy but trained in warfare, he possessed that dangerous combination of intelligence and inexperience that made him willing to voice thoughts his elders had learned to suppress. "What if we're interpreting the data incorrectly?" Nix asked, his genetically perfected vocal cords producing tones designed to sound reasonable and trustworthy. These records span thousands of years. Maybe the mythology reflects actual capability. The war room fell silent, except for the ambient hum of life support systems and the distant thrum of the flagship's engines. Vex studied the young diplomat with interest. In her experience, the most dangerous ideas often came from those too inexperienced to know they were impossible. "Elaborate," she commanded. Nix gestured toward the holographic displays. "Every species we've encountered has combat doctrines based on optimization. Maximum damage, minimum casualties, efficient resource allocation. Humans appear to operate on entirely different principles. They fight losing battles on purpose. They sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts. They treat survival as negotiable, which proves they're defective," Korath interrupted. "Natural selection should have eliminated such tendencies millennia ago. Unless," Nix continued, his confidence growing despite the hostile audience, "those tendencies serve a purpose we don't understand. What if their apparent irrationality is actually a form of psychological warfare? What if their willingness to die makes them more dangerous, not less?" Ambassador Thek's eye stalks writhed with indignation. "You're suggesting these primitives pose a legitimate threat to our coalition? Species that haven't even developed proper FDL drives. I'm suggesting we might be underestimating them based on our own assumptions about rational behavior." Vex found herself genuinely intrigued for the first time in months. The Coalition's upcoming expansion into the Sol system had been planned as a routine resource acquisition. Earth possessed nothing particularly valuable except location, a convenient way station for further expansion into Galactic Arm. The indigenous population would be relocated or integrated according to standard protocols. Simple, efficient, profitable. But simple was boring, and Vex had grown tired of boring. "Sub-Ambassador," she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of command, "are you prepared to stake your career on this assessment?" Nick straightened, his bioengineered spine locking into perfect military posture. "I am, Commander." "Excellent." Vex stood, her movements fluid despite the cybernetic enhancements that had replaced most of her original biology. Then you won't object to a practical demonstration. The war room's atmosphere shifted perceptibly. Even the recycled air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Karatha's implants clicked faster, processing tactical implications. Vex's eye stalks converge on Vex with predatory focus. Dr. ZYTH's crystalline features darken with concern. What kind of demonstration? Nix asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer would complicate his life considerably. Single combat, Vex announced, enjoying the way the words seemed to physically impact her audience. One human against our best warrior. If your assessment is correct and humans truly possess combat capabilities beyond our understanding, their representatives should be able to defeat our champion. If they fail, as logic suggests they must, we proceed with the soul acquisition as planned. And if they succeed, Dr. ZYTH asked quietly, then we reconsider our approach to humanity, perhaps negotiate rather than conquer. Karatha's biomechanical laugh sounded like grinding metal. You're wagering an entire invasion fleet on the combat prowess of a single primitive? I'm wagering on the reliability of our intelligence assessment. Vex corrected. If we can't accurately evaluate the capabilities of a pre-FTL species, what does that say about our readiness to expand into contested territories? The logic was unassailable, which made it all the more infuriating for her subordinates. They had committed to this council session, expecting routine strategic planning, not philosophical challenges to their fundamental assumptions about warfare and civilization. Very well, that conceded, his eye stalks forming patterns of reluctant agreement. But we select the human. No champions, no warriors, no one with formal military training. A random civilian to ensure the test reflects genuine human baseline capability. Agreed, Nix said quickly, before he could reconsider the wisdom of accepting terms that virtually guaranteed a professional destruction. Vex smiled, an expression that had terrified enemies across multiple star systems. This expedition had just become significantly more interesting than resource acquisition. They would collect their test subject from a nearest human facility, a mining operation in the asteroid belt, where individuals were isolated from their species' main population centers. What they found would either confirm their assumptions about human primitiveness or force them to completely reevaluate everything they thought they knew about warfare, survival, and the dangerous unpredictability of species that refused to follow rational behavioral patterns. The wager was set. Now, they simply had to find a human foolish enough to fight for a species that didn't even know it was being tested. Maintenance Engineer 12 had been fixing the same atmospheric recycler for 3 days when the alien ship appeared. She didn't notice it immediately. Her attention was focused on a particularly stubborn filtration matrix that had been making grinding noises since the mining rig's last supply run. The grinder had been malfunctioning for weeks, but the corporate efficiency algorithms determined it was more cost-effective to have an engineer perform daily manual adjustments than to ship replacement parts across 2 solar systems. The first indication that her boring, repetitive existence was about to become significantly more complicated came from mining supervisor Hayes over the comm system. 12. Drop whatever you're doing and report to Base 7. We've got visitors. She wiped lubricant off her hands with a rag that had seen better decades. What kind of visitors need a maintenance engineer? The kind that asks for specific crew members by job classification. Move it. 20 minutes later, she found herself aboard the Coalition flagship, wearing the same grease-stained coveralls she'd been working in when the transport beam had unceremoniously relocated her. The aliens had been polite enough. No restraints, no weapons pointed in her direction, no obvious signs of impending dissection for scientific purposes. They had simply explained that she was needed for evaluation procedures and would be returned to her duties once the process was complete. Your species possesses an unusual relationship with mechanical systems. Observed Dr. ZYTH as 12 examined the broken environmental control panel they had directed her toward. Most civilizations develop specialized castes for technical maintenance. You appear to treat it as a general skill set. 12 shrugged, already identifying the source of the malfunction. Stuff breaks. Someone has to fix it. On a mining rig, that someone is usually whoever happens to be available. She began disassembling the panel with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic after years of similar repairs. The alien technology was different in design but similar in principle. Energy flowed through circuits, components wore out, connections loosened. Physics remained physics regardless of who built the machinery. Fascinating, murmured Dr. White, his crystalline features shifting colors as he observed her work. You're performing diagnostics without accessing technical specifications or consulting repair protocols. Don't need protocols for basic troubleshooting. Listen to the sounds. Feel for heat buildup. Check for loose connections. Most problems are variations on the same 3 or 4 issues. But what if your intuitive assessment is incorrect? 12 paused in her work to look at him directly. Then I try something else. Trial and error beats waiting for perfect information. In the adjacent observation chamber, General Karoth was experiencing what her species might have recognized as unease if they hadn't engineered such emotions out of their genetic line centuries ago. She watched the humans repair work through security feeds while her biomechanical implants ran continuous analysis on the subject's physiological responses. Her stress indicators remained within normal parameters despite being transported against her will to an alien vessel. Karoth reported to the assembled council. No elevated heart rate, no increased perspiration, no signs of psychological distress. Perhaps she doesn't understand the implications of her situation, suggested Thek. She understands. I've been monitoring her biometrics during our briefings. She simply adapted to circumstances beyond her control with remarkable speed. Commander Vex studied the data streams flowing across her personal displays. What about cognitive function? Intelligence assessment? Difficult to quantify using standard metrics. She approaches problems from angles our databases don't predict. When we presented her with the engineering challenges, she ignored our suggested methodologies and developed her own solutions, crude by our standards but effective. Improvisation, said Nix thoughtfully. Their combat records showed the same pattern, abandoning established tactics when they proved insufficient, or when they proved inconvenient, added Dr. White through the intercom. She just bypassed 6 safety protocols because they would have required additional time to implement properly. Did her modifications compromise system integrity? Actually, they improved it. She simplified the circuit pathways and eliminated 3 potential failure points. Karotha's implants clicked with computational distress. She's altering sophisticated technology based on intuitive assessment rather than engineering analysis. This should result in catastrophic system failures. But it doesn't, Vex observed. Why? Because came 12's voice to the monitoring system as she apparently addressed Dr. H. Your engineers overcomplicated the design. Too many redundant systems, too many safety checks, too many ways for things to go wrong. Sometimes simple works better than sophisticated. The council chamber fell silent as they absorbed the implications of that statement. Every species represented in their coalition had achieved spaceflight by increasing technological complexity, layering system upon system, protocol upon protocol, safety measure upon safety measure. The idea that advancement might occasionally require reduction rather than addition contradicted fundamental assumptions about civilizational progress. Request permission to begin psychological evaluation, Thek said finally. Denied, Vex replied. I want her interacting with the champion. Gauge their compatibility for combat. The champion in question was designated Warrior Prime Kilos, a product of the hegemony's most advanced bioengineering programs. 3 meters tall, muscle density enhanced beyond natural limitations, reflexes accelerated through neuromodification. Combat programming downloaded directly into his consciousness. He had never lost a formal challenge and had defeated representatives from 6 different species in ceremonial combat. He was also, as it turned out, profoundly disturbed by his upcoming opponent. She fixes things for a living, Kilo said, his genetically perfected vocal cords carrying a no confusion his designers had failed to engineer out of his personality matrix. How does this qualify her for combat? It doesn't, replied Sub-Ambassador Nix, who had drawn the unwelcome duty of preparing both participants for their encounter. That's rather the point of the exercise. I was created to fight warriors, train killers, opponents who understand the principles of combat. She rebuild machinery. And yet her species has documented combat history spanning millennia. Perhaps the distinction between warrior and civilian isn't as relevant for humans as it is for other species. Kilo studied the human through the transparent barriers separating their preparation areas. 12 had finished repairing the environmental controls and was now examining a malfunctioning food dispenser that had been frustrating the ship's crew for weeks. She worked with the same methodical patience she had shown on the more complex systems, treating the problem as just another puzzle requiring solution. She doesn't look dangerous, Kilo said. According to her psychological profile, she doesn't consider herself dangerous either. She appears to view this entire situation as a temporary inconvenience, preventing her from returning to her normal duties. Then why did she agree to participate? Nix paused in his briefing preparations. The question had been troubling him as well. Standard coalition protocols suggested that individuals facing potential death would attempt negotiation, demonstrate fear responses, or at minimum request additional information about the stakes involved. 12 had simply asked when the fight would take place and whether it would interfere with her shift schedule. I'm not certain she fully comprehends that she might die, Nix admitted. Or, said Kilo slowly, his enhanced intellect processing possibilities as creators had deemed militarily relevant. She comprehends it perfectly and considers it an acceptable risk. Why would anyone consider death acceptable for abstract principles? I don't know, but according to their historical records, humans do this regularly. The champion returned his attention to the human, watching as she successfully restored function to the food dispenser with the same casual competence she had demonstrated on the other systems. She wasn't preparing for combat. She wasn't studying her opponent. She wasn't even asking questions about the rules governing their encounter. She was just fixing things because they were broken, with the patient persistence of someone who had spent years dealing with problems that had no elegant solutions. For the first time in his artificially extended life, Kilos wondered if perfect engineering might be a disadvantage when facing something that had learned to succeed despite imperfection. The ceremonial arena aboard the flagship had hosted 17 formal challenges over the past decade, each following traditions refined across centuries of interspecies diplomacy. Combat began at precisely marked intervals, concluded when one participant yielded or became incapacitated, and proceeded according to established conventions that all civilized species understood implicitly. Maintenance Engineer 12 walked onto the arena floor carrying a wrench. That's not a regulation weapon, announced Arbiter Voss, whose role in these proceedings had never required him to address tool selection before. Wasn't aware there were regulations, 12 replied, hefting the wrench with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had carried it daily for years. This is what I had in my toolkit when you beamed me up here. Across the arena, Kilos emerged from his preparation chamber equipped with bio-enhanced muscle density, accelerated reflexes, downloaded combat programming, and a growing sense that none of his advantages were particularly relevant to the current situation. His weapons, monomolecular blades designed to cut through advanced armor systems, seemed suddenly over-engineered for an opponent wearing coveralls and work boots. The arena perimeter is clearly marked, Arbiter Voss continued, gamely attempting to maintain some semblance of proper procedure. Victory conditions include surrender, incapacitation, or... Yeah, I got it, 12 interrupted, bouncing slightly on her feet to test the arena's artificial gravity. Fight until someone stops fighting. Pretty straightforward. In the observation galleries, representatives from the coalition's member species leaned forward with anticipation. This should be brief, decisive, and educational. A definitive demonstration that human mythology bore no resemblance to human capability. Combatants ready? Voss asked. Kilos activated his enhancement systems, feeling familiar surges of chemical acceleration flooding his modified nervous system. Combat programs initialized, tactical assessments engaged, threat analysis protocols came online. His opponent stood 20 meters away, wrench in hand, apparently waiting for something interesting to happen. Begin, Voss declared. Kilos moved with the fluid precision of engineer perfection, covering half the distance between them in 2 enhanced strides. His tactical programs had identified 17 optimal attack vectors, calculated his opponent's likely defensive responses, and selected the approach most likely to end the encounter quickly without unnecessary brutality. 12 threw a wrench at his head. The projectile wasn't particularly fast by combat standards, nor was it aimed with professional accuracy. It was simply an 8-kilogram chunk of metal following a ballistic trajectory that intersected with Kilos' planned approach vector. His enhanced reflexes allowed him to duck beneath it easily, but the maneuver disrupted his calculated attack pattern and forced him to recalibrate his tactical assessment. By the time he completed his recalibration, 12 had covered the remaining distance between them and punched him in the solar plexus. The blow shouldn't have been effective. Kilos' bio-enhanced physiology included reinforced muscle density, impact-resistant tissue modifications, and pain threshold adjustments that theoretically made him immune to strikes from unenhanced opponents. But theoretical immunity assumed opponents would target expected impact zones using conventional techniques. 12's punch targeted the narrow gap between his abdominal armor plates, delivered with a twisting motion that multiplied the force transfer and included a follow-through that lifted him slightly off his feet. It was the kind of strike someone learned from hitting malfunctioning machinery, rather than trained opponents, focused, practical, and entirely unconcerned with looking impressive. Kilo staggered backward, his enhanced lungs struggling to function while his combat programming frantically updated threat assessments. His opponent wasn't following any recognizable fighting style. She moved like someone accustomed to working in confined spaces, kept her balance like someone who had spent years on unstable surfaces, and struck like someone who knew exactly how much force was required to make stubborn object behave properly. Interesting technique, he managed, activating secondary enhancement protocols to compensate for his reduced respiratory capacity. Nothing fancy, 12 replied, already moving again. Just hit it until it works. She feinted left, ducked under his retaliatory swing, and grabbed his extended arm with both hands. Instead of attempting to break his limb or apply a submission hold, she used his momentum to redirect his enhanced mass into the arena wall. The impact dented the reinforced metal and sent harmonic vibrations through the ship's superstructure. She's treating him like a malfunctioning component, Dr. ZYTH observed from the gallery, his crystalline features shifting through spectrums of amazement. Apply force, observe results, adjust approach accordingly. That's not combat methodology, protested General Karoth. That's mechanical troubleshooting. Yes, agreed Commander Vex, watching as 12 avoided another calculated strike by simply stepping sideways and letting Kilos punch the wall instead of her. Exactly. The fight, if it could properly be called a fight, continued with increasing absurdity. Kilos executed flawless combat maneuvers against an opponent who consistently failed to be where his tactical programs predicted she would be. 12 treated each of his attacks as a problem requiring practical solution rather than a threat requiring defensive response. When he charged, she moved aside and let him hit whatever happened to be behind her. When he attempted grappling techniques, she broke free using leverage principles she had learned from operating heavy machinery. When he tried to corner her, she climbed onto arena equipment and forced him to pursue her into three-dimensional space his combat programming hadn't anticipated. This is humiliating, Sub-Ambassador Nix muttered, watching his career prospect dissolve as 12 used a maintenance ladder to stay consistently above Kilos' reach. She's not even trying to hurt him. She doesn't need to hurt him, Vex realized. She just needs to not lose. The revelation struck the observation gallery with the impact of paradigm shift. Every species present understood combat as a competition between opposing forces, with victory achieved through superior application of violence tactics or technology. They had never encountered an approach based on simply outlasting an opponent's capacity for continued effort. Kilos, meanwhile, was discovering the practical limitations of bioenhanced physiology. His modification system consumed enormous amounts of metabolic energy. His accelerated reflexes required constant chemical maintenance, and his enhanced muscle density generated heat that his cooling system struggled to dissipate. He had been designed for brief, decisive encounters against opponents who shared his understanding of proper combat methodology. 12 possessed no enhanced systems requiring maintenance, no complex tactical programming demanding computational resources, and no assumptions about how fights were supposed to proceed. She had unlimited patience, practical experience with equipment that broke down under stress, and the troubleshooter's fundamental insight that most problems eventually solve themselves if you could just avoid making them worse. After 20 minutes of increasingly frantic pursuit, Kilos finally stopped moving entirely. I yield, he announced, his perfect vocal cords rough with exhaustion. 12 climbed down from a maintenance platform she had been using as a temporary refuge and retrieved her wrench from where it had landed after her opening throw. Good fight, she said, apparently meaning it. No, Kilos replied, his bio-enhanced intellect finally grasping what had just occurred. It really wasn't. In the observation gallery, the silence stretched until Ambassador Thek's ice stalks began weaving patterns of profound disturbance. She didn't defeat our champion, he said slowly. She simply refused to be defeated by him. And that, Commander Vex replied, watching as 12 checked her wrench for damage before returning it to her toolkit, might be the most terrifying thing we could have learned about humans. The emergency session convened 6 hours after the combat concluded. Though calling it an emergency session implied a level of panic that the coalition leadership preferred not to acknowledge publicly. Instead, they termed it a strategic reassessment meeting and pretended that scheduling for 0300 ship time was coincidental rather than an attempt to minimize witness attendance. We need new categories, declared Dr. ZYDH, his crystalline form dim with intellectual exhaustion. Our threat assessment matrices don't account for opponents who succeed through persistence rather than capability. Persistence is a capability, corrected General Karoth, though her biomechanical implants have been clicking irregularly since the arena encounter ended. We simply failed to quantify it properly. Because it's unquantifiable, Ambassador Thek interjected, his ice stalks weaving agitated patterns. How do you measure someone's refusal to acknowledge logical limitations? How do you plan countermeasures against opponents who ignore tactical realities? Commander Vex listened to the debate while reviewing personnel files from Earth's databases. Mining operations, construction crews, emergency responders, maintenance technicians. Thousands of individuals whose job descriptions included phrases like problem resolution under adverse conditions and equipment operation beyond manufacturer specifications. Not soldiers, not warriors, just people who made things work when they weren't supposed to work. Perhaps we're approaching this incorrectly, she said, interrupting another round of circular arguments about threat classification. Instead of determining how to defeat them, maybe we should be asking how to manage them. Management implies ongoing relationship, Sub-Ambassador Nix pointed out. The original plan called for resource extraction and population relocation. Simple, efficient, profitable. The original plan assumed we understood what we were dealing with. The council chamber central display activated, showing real-time feeds from the humans' temporary quarters. 12 had requested permission to examine the ship's waste recycling systems after noticing unusual odors in the ventilation network. The crew had granted her access partly out of curiosity and partly because the systems had indeed been malfunctioning for months. She was currently elbow deep in filtration housing, making modifications that had already improved air quality throughout 3 decks. Her approach remained consistent. Ignore the technical manuals, listen to machinery, fix what was broken regardless of whether the repair methods appeared in any approved procedures. She's redesigned our waste processing efficiency by 37%, reported Dr. ZYTH, consulting real-time performance data, using spare parts cannibalized from systems we had classified as irreparable. Without authorization, Karoth added, without consulting safety protocols, without consideration for potential system integration conflicts, and without creating any problems, Vex observed. In fact, she solved several issues our engineering teams had categorized as acceptable operational limitations. Commander, Vex said carefully, surely you're not suggesting we integrate human maintenance personnel into our fleet operations. I'm suggesting we reconsider what integration might look like. Our current protocols assume conquered populations require either elimination or strict control. But what if some populations are more valuable as partners and subjects? The suggestion hung in the recycled air like a contaminate their filtration systems couldn't process. Every species in the coalition had achieved spaceflight through hierarchical expansion. Conquer resources, assimilate useful populations, eliminate complications. The concept of voluntary cooperation between equals contradicted fundamental assumptions about how civilizations interacted. Partners? Nix repeated, his genetically perfected features expressing confusion his designers had assumed would never be necessary. With a pre-FTL species that hasn't even established interplanetary colonies, a pre-FTL species whose single representative just defeated our best warrior, using a maintenance tool and creative thinking. She didn't defeat him, Koroth protested. She simply outlasted his enhancement systems. Yes, which means she accomplished with baseline biology what our most advanced genetic engineering couldn't prevent. Now imagine what 1,000 of them could accomplish. Or 10,000. The mathematics were disturbing. Coalition expansion relied on predictable force ratios, calculate enemy capabilities, deploy superior resources, achieve victory through overwhelming advantage. Humans appear to operate outside those calculations entirely. They didn't become more dangerous by getting stronger or smarter or better equipped. They became more dangerous by refusing to accept that danger was a reason to stop trying. New proposal, Vex announced, her decision crystallizing as she spoke. Instead of conquest, we offer employment. Humans seem to prefer fixing problems to creating them. Our expansion operations generate numerous problems requiring unconventional solutions. You want to hire them, Vex said flatly. I want to see what happens when we point their problem-solving persistence at challenges that have been frustrating our engineers for decades. And if they refuse, then we proceed with the original plan. But if they accept, she left the implications unspoken. Every species present could extrapolate the possibilities. Human maintenance crews aboard coalition vessels, developing solutions their own engineers had never considered. Human emergency responders dealing with the kinds of disasters that occurred when civilizations expanded too quickly across hostile environments. Human troubleshooters tackling the persistent, irritating problems that every advanced technology eventually accumulated. This is unprecedented, Dr. ZYDH said finally. So was today's combat demonstration, Vex replied. Unprecedented situations require unprecedented responses. The debate continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable once they began calculating the practical implications. Conquest required ongoing resource expenditure for occupation and control. Partnership required only negotiation and mutual benefit arrangements. The humans got employment opportunities beyond their limited solar system. The coalition got access to a problem-solving approach their own species had apparently evolved beyond. It was, as 12 might have said, a practical solution to a complicated problem. The maintenance engineer herself remained unaware of the strategic implications her wrench-wielding had generated. When informed that the coalition wished to discuss employment opportunities for her species, she simply asked whether the job would pay better than asteroid mining, and whether she could bring her own tools. Most likely, replied Sub-Ambassador Nix, who had been assigned to handle preliminary negotiations despite his earlier career miscalculations. What kind of tools do you typically require? Nothing fancy. Wrench, screwdriver set, some electrical tape, maybe a portable welder. Most problems don't need complicated solutions if you understand what you're trying to fix. And what about training? Orientation to our technologies and procedures. 12 considered this while cleaning lubricant from her fingernails. Could probably figure out as I go. Broken is broken, regardless of who built it. Nix made notes in his personal files, already anticipating the bureaucratic nightmare of integrating a species whose approach to training consisted of figure out as you go. The Coalition Standard Procedures manuals alone comprised thousands of volumes covering every conceivable operational scenario. One more question, he said. In the arena today, you seemed remarkably calm considering the stakes involved. Most individuals facing potential death experience significant stress responses. Wasn't really facing death, 12 replied. Was just facing a problem that needed solving. Big guy was trying to hurt me, so I needed to make him stop trying. Worked out fine. But you could have been seriously injured. Could get seriously injured crossing the mining platform back home. Could get seriously injured fixing a malfunctioning reactor core. Could probably get seriously injured getting out of bed if I was unlucky enough. Risk is just part of the job. What job? Living, 12 said, as if the answer should have been obvious. Everything breaks eventually. Somebody has to fix it. She returned to her examination of the waste recycling systems, leaving Nix to contemplate the implications of a species that treated existence itself as an ongoing maintenance problem requiring constant attention and occasional creative solutions. The Coalition's expansion into the Sol system proceeded as scheduled, but with significantly different objectives than originally planned. Instead of conquest, they established the first interspecies employment cooperative in galactic history. Instead of displacing human populations, they began recruiting human maintenance personnel for positions throughout their fleet operations. The arrangement proved mutually beneficial, though it required extensive modifications to existing procedures manuals and the development of entirely new categories for threat assessment and personnel evaluation. Some problems, as it turned out, really did solve themselves if you just stopped trying to solve them the way you had always solved problems before.